We'd like to thank our sponsor, Osea, the pioneers of clean, clinically proven skincare from the sea that delivers visible results while respecting the planet. Osea skincare harnesses the benefits of seaweed, a nutrient-rich oceanic plant packed with vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. And from their best-selling Undaria algae body oil and hyaluronic sea serum, every Osea product is formulated to nourish your skin and promote a radiant, healthy complexion. And customers have shared that it makes their skin glow all the time. Their products are vegan, cruelty-free, and free of harmful ingredients like parabens, synthetic fragrances, and sulfates. And as a climate-neutral certified and ocean-positive verified brand, they're dedicated to protecting our oceans and preserving the beauty of our planet for generations to come. You can glow from the inside out with clean vegan skin and body care from Osea. Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code GATEWAYS at oseamalibu.com, and you'll get free samples with every order and free shipping on orders over $60. You can head to oseamalibu.com and use the code GATEWAYS for 10% off. Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, consciousness, and spirituality. On today's episode, I'll be speaking with Charles Eisenstein, a speaker, essayist, and author of several books, including The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, and many others. Known as a countercultural philosopher, his work spans economics, science, health, ecology, technology, spirituality, and the mythological structure of civilization. And I am so excited to welcome Charles to the show. So welcome to the show, Charles.
Hi, Yasmin. Really happy to be here.
Likewise. So Charles, to kick it off, you talk about these new economic systems based on gift economies. I'm really curious, can you explain to us a little bit about what you envision the new economic system to be and why?
Yeah, thank you. Gift economy is one of the themes of a book I wrote a number of years ago called Sacred Economics. And it's really, the book is kind of a history of money and property, and considers the question, because economics as we know it originated in gift culture. Ancient societies were all gift-based cultures where people didn't necessarily keep track or quantify what they gave and received. But, everybody witnessed the generosity of other people. They knew who was pulling their weight and who wasn't. And the gratitude that is natural when you receive a gift motivates the onward gift. So that's how society worked. And when we began to keep track of that, eventually that system of keeping track of it turned into what we know today as money. So the question in this book, money is this beautiful idea. It's supposed to connect gifts with needs. It's supposed to coordinate human creativity. Well, why has it turned into seemingly the source of all that is wrong in the world? Because after all, what is money? At bottom, it's just a story. It's just the meanings that we imbue into symbols. And theoretically, we could write another story of money that encourages our flourishing rather than competition and scarcity. So that's the basic idea of that book.
And Charles, where do you think we went wrong when it came to the conversation around money and the stories about money? Was it at the sort of genesis point, or do you feel like at some point in history we started to lose our way, and why?
Yeah, I don't. I used to think that there was some moment where we lost our way, the fall from grace. But I see things a lot more now as an inevitable process, a journey into separation, a journey into competition, a journey into scarcity, a journey into all of the dramas that define human life today, with the, I guess you could say, the oversoul intention of emerging from this age of separation into a age of reunion that is enriched by the journey that we have been on. So I don't think that there was necessarily a wrong turn, but rather that many factors like the development of technology, the division of labor, the concentrations of population that agriculture allowed, and therefore the advent of the stranger, a new phenomenon, as of a few thousand years ago. Like all of these things coalesced into what we know as civilization, and and in our time we're reaching a maybe the peak intensity of separation, separation from each other, separation from community, separation from nature, people spending so much of their time on screens in abstract realms, and even separation from our own bodies. Like this is the this is our defining moment, and this separation births all kinds of crises that intensify the more that we hold on. And that could be a birth crisis, could be what expels us from a society built on separation and into, I call it, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Even though it has been betrayed, that hope has been betrayed many times, still we have a recognition that the situation is not hopeless. And in fact, that there is some kind of purpose or intelligence to even the most horrible turns of events in our world.
So, okay, so I want to unpack that a little bit. I mean, you talk about separation and this sort of this moment in history that we're in that's getting, I think, a little bit more polarized and disembodied, if you will. What would you sort of tell people who are suffering from separation, who are already in this kind of polarity, mindset, right? Like, how do you walk them out of it?
Yeah, it's not just some bad idea that you got. It's so deeply programmed into our very perceptions.
Right.
For example, if I ask you to close your eyes and imagine yourself doing nothing but existing, just imagine yourself existing. What does that look like?
Do you want me to answer it, or is that
Yeah, yeah.
sure? Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it wasn't a rhetorical question, but you can answer it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just existing. So for me, it feels like I'm connected to everything. If I'm just existing, I'm sort of this you know, packet of energy that is woven into the fabric of all the energies in the world.
hmm Yeah. So that is a an experience not of separation, but of what some call interbeing. Whereas, when I ask people that question, often they say, "Well, I'm just kind of floating in space," Um, whereas an indigenous person might say, might envision themselves surrounded by family or surrounded by nature. Like to exist was not to be separate. To exist was to relate, and that is actually connected to the experience of being in a gift economy, where the truth in that situation is that more for you is more for me. Your good fortune is also my good fortune. Very practically, because people don't accumulate in a gift culture. If they have more than they need, they give to somebody else. And that person gives to somebody else, and that gives to somebody else, and eventually it comes back in a circle. So it's tangibly true that more for you is more for me, and less for you is less for me. If you get hurt It's not like, oh, one less competitor for the job opening. It's, oh no, now you won't be able to contribute to the well-being of all. So the lived experience is one of interbeing, whereas in our society, it's just not so obvious. In fact, in a money system that's based on interest-bearing debt, more for you is less for me because scarcity is ingrained in the system. So, long story short, this isn't just um, it's not only to change our thinking, to change our beliefs, to change our consciousness, because the system creates the consciousness and the consciousness creates the system. Both create each other. So we're looking at a simultaneous transition
Mm.
on the personal and the collective level.
Mm. What is, I'm curious, from your perspective, what's the best case scenario for that transformation, for that kind of simultaneous experience playing out? What do you envision? I'm curious about your perspective on the future.
Yeah, this is uh, one of the ways that my beliefs have changed actually in the last few years. I used to think that crisis and collapse was going to save us. Maybe peak oil was going to save us. Maybe 2012 was going to save us. Some kind of our current ways or climate change was going to save us. Some kind of catastrophe was going to force humanity to make the changes that I want us to make. But I no longer think that we're going to be saved by our own failures. I think that it's always a choice. So the gift of a crisis or this collapse moment is that it makes the choice more obvious. It reminds us that we have a choice. It's a fork in the road. What will we choose? Will we choose a new kind of society, or actually, I would say a new and ancient kind of society, or will we double down and cling all the more tightly to the system that is making us miserable? I cannot determine that for everybody, but the awareness of this choice, um, lands in my own life and in everybody's life, and so as far as what it looks like, um, I think we all get glimpses of what the world could be. I was recently spent some time with a healer. He was a student of this Vedic healer, Dr. Naran, who was basically a miracle worker, and in minutes would cure people of decades long illnesses that were considered incurable. And you've probably also had experiences that conventional knowledge says are impossible, that your education in school says couldn't happen. In fact, a lot of these are staring us in the face. If you've ever investigated crop circles, for example, there are phenomena that we just shut out of reality, that if we let them in, everything that we think is real and possible would disintegrate, and we would be gazing at a much bigger horizon. And I don't think that any real change is going to happen in our society if we don't let those data points in. Things from the so-called paranormal, things from holistic medicine, things from um, even like truth and reconciliation work, that generate social miracles, interpersonal miracles, miracles of forgiveness, not only um, material, physical, miraculous phenomena that point to the capacities of the human mind and the human soul. I mean, I would say forgiveness is a capacity of the human soul. There's going to have to be an awful lot of forgiveness if we're ever going to have peace on this planet. Because in every place where there is war and conflict, each side is absolutely convinced that they are in the right and the other side is in the wrong. So, how is that ever going to change? It's been like this for thousands of years. But sometimes we see it happening, maybe even in a fighting couple, in our personal sphere. And one of them comes to you and Yasmin, first he did this and then he did that, and isn't that inexcusable, and how could he? And the expectation is that you're going to take her side and join with her in, yes, you are good and he is bad. And that, as long as we perpetuate that way of being and and declare that this is how a human being operates, even in those tiny circumstances, then what hope is there for there to be peace in Palestine or Ukraine or anywhere in the world? So these are all so a the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible really depends on the propagation of the consciousness of peace, the consciousness of beauty, the consciousness of sovereignty that that each of us in our own sphere creates a template for.
Mm. Wow. I could not agree with you more on all the things you shared. And as a child of two Iraqi immigrants, I have witnessed, I think, the unfolding of two very polarized points of view growing up, about a war. And I agree that forgiveness is really, a liberty tool, if you will, to be able to be in awareness and observation and think of the collective as opposed to one side. And I think that also it starts from this original kind of idea that we are all separate beings and not connected to each other, right? And so you talk about that as interconnectedness. But I want to double click a little bit on this idea of the intergenerational perspectives, and if you have observed if those are going to kind of help move the narrative forward to this more beautiful world that we all want to live in. And I specifically am calling out the baby boomers versus Gen Z, because I see that that's where there's a really big divide in consciousness, and there's a really big kind of tension point. I have a lot of Gen Z friends who are often bewildered, by a lot of the baby boomer decisions, especially on the level of politics and the level of power and influence. So I'm curious if you've seen anything play out in that realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite easy to hate on the baby boomers, but you got to understand they came of age at the pinnacle of our civilization when it seemed like the mindsets and methods of civilization, of modernity, of science, of technology were going to bring us into utopia. We were going to conquer the wild once and for all and make a perfect society. We were going to eliminate all disease. We were going to bring order to chaos. We were going to plumb the depths of all mysteries and engineer the world into perfection. And not just the material world, but the social world too. The social sciences. We're gonna engineer human affairs, political science, sociology. Everything was becoming a science, and people were confidently predicting utopia. What are we going to do with all the leisure time that we're going to have? What are we're going to have a world of no disease, 200-year lifespans. All of these things were confidently predicted because they were the continuation of a triumphal trend that had been, lasted for centuries. I mean, the world in at least in Western countries, life was way better in 1950 than it was in 1850 in the depths of the Industrial Revolution. Life expectancy had gone up by 30 years. So, yeah, when we look at the baby boomers and their choices, we have to understand that they came of age and their parents came of age in the upswing of that cycle. Now, since then, we've seen the complete failure of all of those visions where, I mean, even life expectancy is starting to fall right now. And the ecological basis of human civilization is starting to disintegrate. And, chronic disease is 5 or 10 times higher than it was in 1950. And I mean, we could go on and on. I mean, in some ways, things have gotten measurably better, um, you know, but you cannot say that we are closer to utopia than we were 60 years ago. So I guess, Gen Z, I mean, I'm Gen X. Um, it was already in my time that triumphalist view was already on the wane. The 60s were over. Uh, they, and I grew up in what they called, I don't know what they called it, the age of Ronald Reagan. Um, the age of greed is good. I mean, all of these 60s ideals had already collapsed, and it generated this tremendous cynicism and um, background despair. Like we in the 60s, they thought that we were almost there. We had solved the material struggle, and now we were going to elevate spiritually. It was so powerful in that time, and the betrayal of those hopes um, struck such a deep blow that people just turned to themselves, um, gave up on uh, their aspirations and their ideals. Um, one reason that people become selfish and self-centered is that they're not offered anything that they can really care about. We need a story of the people, a story that tells us why human beings are here. And we had one. It was Onward to the Stars, bringing order to the galaxy, the triumph of man, the ascent of man. That this was the guiding mythology of our civilization, and that has completely collapsed, and we don't have anything yet to replace it. So Generation Z is actually the generation um, that can receive the next story for our civilization that will give sense and meaning to life again, and identity to the human being. And so you'll be able to say, I know why I am here, not just on a personal level, but I know what I am part of. The 50s child knew what they were part of. They were going to be a nuclear scientist. They were going to be an astronaut. They were going to contribute to the grand program of human conquest of everything. And we don't have that anymore. But it's starting to emerge. And I think that in its first stages, it's a story of healing. It's a story of beauty. It's a story of restoration that answers, why am I here?
Hmm. Yeah, so to all the Gen Zs listening, we need a better story. We need a more beautiful story. And, I want to dissect this idea of like the power of storytelling and myth and shaping culture. I mean, you obviously just, talked about the Gen Z sort of influencing this next wave of meaning. But I'm curious if there are other myths or stories that you think are important for us to just be aware of as a kind of global, human society, and what stories might be preventing us from moving forward.
Yeah. So on one level, you could say that things like a nation is a story, a border is a story, money is a story, law is a story, government is a story. Even money, which we talk about as the most real thing imaginable. If someone tells you to get practical, it's often about money. Well, it only exists because we agree it exists. It's a story. When we recognize that, then we enter a meta level consciousness that we're able to say, okay, hold on, if that's just a story, we can rewrite the story. Now, there are other stories that are a lot more subtle. I mentioned the story of separation, the story of a separate self in an objective universe, a universe of other. The story of science that says that the reality outside of ourselves is fundamentally separate from our inner reality. Like that's in the scientific method. That's why you can repeat experiments. The experimenter doesn't matter. This experiment is the same. There's no connection between consciousness and reality, and that's a story, And maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Maybe there's truth in it. Um, and then there's the story of how to be a man, how to be a woman, how to be healthy. When I was growing up, you get sick, you go to the doctor fixes you, and the ability of the doctor to fix you is improving every year thanks to the amazing triumphs of modern medicine, which is conquering one disease after the next. Like that's a story. But if you are, um, I don't know, immersed in the world of homeopathy or shamanic healing or something like that, you'll be living in a very different story. And so right now, the defining myths of my childhood, as I said, are disintegrating, and we're grasping for other sources of meaning. And I mean, I could also talk about I mean, I could talk about myths like the hero's journey and things like that, but I'm actually more interested in the things that we don't even recognize as
Mm.
myths
Mm.
because we think that they're just true. We think that they're real. Real myths penetrate that deeply into the psyche.
So I'd like to know what myths are those that we are not maybe aware of, or maybe we're not aware of it, but I'm just curious, like what are some, myths that you think at least the mainstream culture is not aware of?
Well, so here's one. I mean, I just named some, but one of them would be what you call a theory of change. And this is based on Newtonian physics that says that change in the world happens when a force is exerted on a mass. That means that your power to change the world is very, very tiny unless you somehow marshal a lot of force under your command through a lot of money or a lot of hierarchical power. And if you do that, you become a powerful person. So in this mythology, the powerful people in the world are people like, Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin and Elon Musk, people with a lot of political and financial power. And what they do matters. And what you do doesn't matter unless, I don't know, maybe if you have a platform, Yasmin, with millions of listeners, then maybe you'd have more influence. But think about what that mythology leaves out. Like, what about the single mother who is just, you know, even under tremendous pressure, still finds it within herself to be patient with her child and to raise him in a good way, and is never recognized, celebrated, or thanked for that, and sends him off into life, her gift to the future. The theory of change that I just stated does not validate that she did anything really important. Certainly not anything world changing. Certainly not in comparison to a big celebrity or a president or a CEO. But on some other level, we recognize that a person like that is is making that their choices have cosmic significance. That each one of us has equal power to determine the future, and that those of us who operate outside the conventional mechanisms of power are nonetheless just as important, and that our choices operate through mysterious means. So, one of the replacement myths for the myth that change happens through force is, one way to put it is morphic resonance. Rupert Sheldrake's idea that any change that happens in one place generates a field of change that causes that change to start happening other places too. So your invisible act of compassion or courage or care, the daycare worker who gives those babies a little extra love, more than her job requires, and no one ever even knows it. And even that baby grows up and doesn't remember it, yet it's imprinted. That little bit of extra love is imprinted on that child who carries it forth into the future. That 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 action creates a field of that kind of care that affects world leaders just as much as it affects anybody else. And when the world leader makes a better choice than he might otherwise have made, maybe it was because of that daycare worker. Basically, what I'm saying is that conventional thinking, the modern mind, has no idea really how this world works. And you and I have probably, I'm sure you have had experiences that reveal an outcropping of another system of causality when a synchronicity arises in your life. And you're like, how did that happen? These synchronicities that reveal an implicate order, another intelligence behind things that we can appeal to with the prayers that are embedded in our choices. Every choice is a prayer. It's a prayer that says, this is what the human being is. This is what the human being does in this kind of circumstance.
Mm.
And that, if we embrace that theory of change, this world is going to transform.
Wow, Charles. I just want to underscore this point for those who are listening because, the idea, I think that this inquiry has come up so much, can one person really make a difference? And there's a lot of literature out there that talks about, the butterfly, what is it called? The chaos theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
If a butterfly flaps its wings in one country, it has all this impact in other places all over the world. And David Hawkins wrote about our scale of consciousness impacting others around us. You mentioned Rupert Sheldrake, and the morphic resonance and how that can impact others around us. And I think we have definitely got caught up in this story that success is measured by these limited metrics, right? Like financial and perhaps like how much time you spend on different media outlets and what that means. So I want to thank you for that comment because I think a lot of people are struggling to kind of connect with their own meaning. And, raising a child well has such powerful consequences on this planet. And so I really want to underscore that point. It's beautiful. What about I want to go back a little bit to the gift economy, because one thing that really drew me to you, Charles, was just how open you are about being an example of the gift economy in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm curious, can you tell us, what have you learned from this experience of creating the gift economy in your own kind of personal business? And
Yeah. So what I do, I don't use paywalls or anything like that. When I do online events or even in-person events, I basically say, pay what feels good and right to you. And I've, operated quite successfully in that way. Although one of the disadvantages I've found is that if there's no entry ritual where you have to sacrifice something, then people tend not to take it as seriously, and they tend not to invest as much in it. So another way I do it sometimes is I'll say, okay, this program is $33 a month or something like that. I have one right now called The Turning of the Age that's ongoing. And I'm like, yeah, you can pay 33 a month or half price or a quarter price or zero. You decide, and I trust your decision, and I receive with gratitude. And because ultimately, why am I doing all this? It's not to fundamentally to enrich myself. It's not like I sat down 30 years ago and decided that this would be my path to riches. If so, I was sadly mistaken. For much of my career anyway. But no, it's like you have something that you want to give, and I don't want to limit that. Because there's a lot of people today who like even $5 a month is, they're barely making ends meet. I don't want them to give me $5 a month. I want them to have it for free. And I want people who are in surplus to subsidize them and to give me generously. So I do my best to create business conditions where both can happen. And it's been a challenge a little bit in some ways because that concept is kind of unfamiliar to people, and people are really jaded. They think it's all about the money. How he's, what sales funnel is this going to put me through? What's he going to upsell me now? And yes, so there are some challenges in it, but I think it sends a good energy into the world when you can subscribe for free and you get the same content, the same privileges. There's no paywall.
Mm. Amazing. Yeah, I was just very curious how that was working out because obviously coming from Burning Man culture, which is,
Mm-hmm.
Non-transactional. And by the way, I'm Middle Eastern, so I really love the concept that you bring up, which is this idea of just being generous with yourself and, without calculating attribution or, or
Mm-hmm.
counting who gave what. I grew up in a culture that was very generous
Yeah.
and giving. And so it's very confusing actually to kind of come into society and like learn about the transactional nature of things.
The
So
less modern, the less developed, so-called, a society is, the more gift culture it has. I spent 9 years of my life in Taiwan, and it still had a very thriving gift culture. You could not go to somebody's house and not be offered food, and if you didn't accept the food, that would be an insult. Like there was this whole dance of giving and receiving that created social ties and traditions of hospitality, and the appropriate gift to the appropriate person in the appropriate occasion. I'm sure in Iraq there's something like this as well.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And when you talk about these moments, the word that comes up for me is the sacred. And that's why there is a generosity of spirit, because for us, in these moments, it is sacred to have someone visiting you and visiting your home, or being in your company and wanting to really make them feel felt and seen and heard and welcomed. And you use that word sacred in your book, Sacred Economics. And I've just heard you use that quite a bit. So I'm curious, why you chose that word for your book, Sacred Economics, and what it means to you.
Yeah. Um, so I would say at the beginning, I hesitate to try to define sacred because I don't want to try to capture it in like it's already an elemental concept. But I would say that for something to be sacred, it's a function of uniqueness and relationship. Something if it's an exact copy of something else, then if it's mass produced, then it's not a sacred object. It has to embody attention and care for it to be sacred. And it has to be part of a matrix of relationship. So you take a sacred object that people have prayed over, maybe for generations, and you extract it from that context and you put it in a museum somewhere, and it becomes no longer sacred, but even profane. It becomes something that has been ripped away from its context. And for all of the material progress that we have made, we have impoverished ourselves of the sacred, where the wealthier you are, the more you are surrounded by objects made through industrial processes by total strangers purchased for money. And that you think that you're rich if you're surrounded by such things, but actually you are poor compared to somebody, maybe 100, 200 years ago, where every single thing that they touched was made for them by someone that they knew. That makes you feel like you are here, that you're actually embodied and in the world, not surrounded by alienated objects. And as long as we are alienated like that, we're always going to be hungry for what's missing, which is connection, belonging, intimacy, um, uh, all of these spiritual needs that go unmet. And as long as they're unmet, we will crave and crave and crave and try to fill up the void with more and more money, more and more stuff, and none of it will ever be enough. And then we turn on ourselves. Even overeating could be a response to a scarcity of connection, to loneliness. And then you turn on yourself for overeating and blame the symptom as if it were the problem and increase the separation even more. This is the trap that so many of us have fallen into. And the first step out of that trap, I think, is to forgive ourselves and to recognize that so much of the behavior in ourselves and in others that we judge is simply a response to the dispossession and the alienation of modern life.
Mm. Yeah, I could not agree more. And, as you're talking, I'm sort of thinking, talk about these ideas of like overeating and this scarcity of connection that increases separation. I think that what I have observed too, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, is that there's sort of a lack of intimacy with self in our culture, which makes it really difficult for someone to offer intimacy with another or deep intimacy with another. And, I think, I'm curious what you've noticed when it comes to the levels of intimacy and where people are really struggling in that.
Yeah. So I think one reason for a lack of intimacy with self is self-judgment. If you are convinced that you are bad and shameful, then you're not going to want to actually look at that. You're going to want to avoid yourself. And there is so much in our environment that tells us that we are bad and shameful. I mean, it's built into schooling, it's built into modern parenting. This idea that to become a good human being, you have to overcome your nature. You have to overcome, like this. This is, for example, um, when parents use punishment and approval, the withholding of approval or the granting of approval to control their children, they tap into the basic, like the most primal fear of a mammal, And in order to prove yourself good, you will do anything. You will do anything to earn this conditional approval. So you will pretend to be what you are not. And this becomes a habit of pretending to be what we are not. And maybe on one level, believing our self image, but on a deeper level, feeling like a fraud. So as long as there's this deep conviction that you are a fraud, that you are a terrible person pretending to be good, that it might be unconscious. This is what's true of the narcissist. The narcissist acts like they're God's gift to humankind, but underneath it, because they were never validated for who they really were, but only for what they appeared to be, they have a deep-seated conviction of their own worthlessness. And as long as that is in place, and I think to almost anybody who's grown up in our society, there's something of that, then it's going to be really hard to be intimate with yourself because you're afraid. You're afraid of what you'll see. You're afraid that you'll encounter something unacceptable. And how to exit this trap. There's two things that I would say. One is simply to see what the trap is, which is what I'm illuminating right now. And the other is not something that you can do yourself, but it's something that is done to you, which is when somebody sees through you and loves you anyway. The way that we learn self-love, unconditional self-love, is by being unconditionally loved, which means that the elevation of our consciousness is a group activity. It's not something that we achieve. It's something that we give and receive and thereby collectively evolve.
Wow. I really appreciate this. I think I'm just sort of taking it in. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm rarely speechless on my podcast, but right now I'm a little speechless. The idea that this idea of unconditionally loving, being in a world that is unconditionally loving, I find, I'm curious, um, you know, where that's playing out right now in culture, because I feel like a lot of people are not unconditionally loved, is certainly mentioned by their families, and even our modern relationships are just changing so drastically now. I think what's kind of been a very common theme in California is that there's now polyamory, and I think group marriages and like all this kind of new experiments playing out, which is interesting, because I think I think a lot of people are really confused about that unconditional kind of love. And I'm just kind of curious, what that means in relationship, and what you've seen, or if you're even tracking that.
Yeah, I'm definitely tracking that. This is part of the process of the breakdown of our old stories. One of them is the single family, the nuclear family, the institution of marriage, which we saw as just the way things are and are supposed to be, not knowing that other cultures had very different practices around love and relationship. And that story of traditional marriage, I mean, it was in a phase of accelerating breakdown even when I was a kid. The divorce rate was climbing, and now I think it's probably over 50%, And so the old story is not working, and we don't really have a new story yet. So I think that all of these experiments in polyamory and other structures of relationship are a grasping, a search, a seeking of a new story that has not really congealed yet. But I think that a lot of we're really on a learning curve. And I'll say also, as far as the childhood programming and I don't know what the figure is, something like a third of children suffer physical or sexual abuse, in the home. Maybe it's even more. Um, and and even the kinds of normalized abuse, such as, you know, sending a kid off to school with a bunch of strangers all of a sudden, or shifting them from one daycare center to another every year, and they develop a bond with the person there, and then they're moved to another one, and the bond breaks, and they develop a new bond, and that bond breaks, and I mean, there's just so much trauma embedded in our way of life. But I will also say that the souls that are coming in now are here to heal from that. This and they are capable of doing that. And every time that somebody is born into awful circumstances and makes the return journey, they're doing a tremendous service for humanity, because these stories must be told to completion. And if you are one of those people and you accomplish nothing else in your life except to pass less pain on to the next generation than you received yourself, you have done a mighty service to humanity. And so, to some extent, all of us, we're born into this time, as I said before, of peak separation, or at least, I mean, things can get worse, but we are born with the imperative to take a different path, to begin the return journey. And we are capable of doing that. And I would, in this moment, invoke that knowledge in everyone listening, that you are capable of doing that you were born to heal, born into the age of separation in order to bring it towards healing.
What a powerful message for people, I think, who are just endlessly under so much pressure, to do more than that. And I really, appreciate that. Charles, as we're kind of coming to time, I could talk to you forever. I have a couple last questions. I actually want to touch on climate change because
Mhm.
I know that that's a big topic. And so I'm curious, like, what is it, what's your perspective on our climate reality today? And what do you think we should be thinking about right now?
Yeah, so I wrote a book on climate change, uh, and I take a very different approach than the mainstream. I think that we are facing a grave ecological crisis, and that the main cause of that crisis is the degradation of ecosystems through deforestation, through draining wetlands, through overfishing, through the poisoning of the oceans, the soil, the air, the water, um, because Earth is a living being. Some call it Gaia. And the health of this living being depends on the health of its organs and its tissues and its cells. And ecosystems and species, forests, wetlands, coral reefs, et cetera, these are the organs. So if we continue to degrade the organs, to pave them over, to cut them down, to dig pit mines in them, to fish them out, et cetera, if we continue to do that, then we could reduce carbon emissions to zero and it wouldn't help. Earth would still die a death of a million cuts. And so we need to turn our attention to making Earth more alive through everything that our society does, restoring soil, regenerating ecosystems, protecting wilderness areas, protecting rainforests, and bringing more life to each other as well, because life creates the conditions for life. So that's you know, for me, it's not so much a matter of greenhouse gases, although those could be an exacerbating factor. It's really about the organs of a living being.
Mm. Yeah, and I love that you like humanize the earth because I think a lot of people. I had like Jeffrey Mishlove on the show, and he often said people treat Earth like it's a this like clock, this like machine, not like a living, breathing, being. And so I
Right.
really appreciate that.
Like an engine that you need to alter the air fuel mixture,
Yeah, totally.
tweak some gases and it'll be fine. No.
Totally. Totally. It's so fascinating, us humans. So, Charles, looking back on your experience, I mean, it seems like you sit in so many different worlds and you have an interconnected perspective, it seems, on so many topics and subjects, and which makes sense, right? Because I think a lot of people think about things in silos. And so I'm curious, what has surprised you the most on your journey, looking back about humanity, about the work that you've been doing? I'm just curious.
Well, I have to say I got a big surprise when COVID hit, and I saw society kind of retreating into its worst instincts and abandoning, all of this new knowledge and alternative medicine and stuff, and just like reacting in so much fear. I had thought that we were farther along than that, and that sent me into quite a dark night of the soul, um, and it was sobering, you know. And I think that's actually what finally shook me loose from thinking that something external was going to save us. Because at the time I wrote an essay that circulated very widely called "The Coronation," um, which was a play on coronavirus, but which said, a coronation is a ritual initiation into full sovereignty. And sovereignty means choice. And I saw much of what happened in COVID as, we kind of got a preview of where we were going, a world where you are constantly surveilled and traced, and where you have no civil liberties, and um, uh, medicated and indoors. It wasn't even like this medical stuff so much as life migrated indoors. Everything happened online. It was this was the age of separation at its extreme. Like you don't even associate in public. There is no such thing as public. You don't touch anybody. And I'm like, okay, these trends have been happening anyway. COVID just accelerated them. But life was already migrating indoors and online. And so this intensified version of it, I said, this is giving us a choice. Do we want to move towards this future? And I guess, to answer your question, I was surprised at how willingly people accepted it all. But I also saw hope in there, because I think one reason that people accepted this enormous disruption of their lives, the lockdowns, for example, is that they kind of wanted to get out of their lives already anyway. They were like, finally, we are delivered from the hopeless dead end routine. There's like a big change is in the air. And I think that is why the public so readily acquiesced to a lot of what was done. And so that impulse, um, that perennial hope that things can change. That's the encouraging thing that I took from the COVID times. And yeah, I mean, I know this is probably even today still controversial, but you asked, so I answered.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
always love the truth. So it's it's actually fascinating how many people have forgotten about the pandemic. Like it's just like, oh yeah, we did that for however many years, and live that way. It was just a wild experience. Charles, what do you want to tell our listeners as your main takeaway on wellness, well-being? What's sort of the call to action that you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I would say that to return it to the story of the separate self, as opposed to the story of interbeing. Um, in the story of the separate self, health is the integrity of that self, uh, and it comes through dominating or insulating yourself from all the competitors. It's like the health of a potted plant that you have to give exactly all the right inputs and then you'll be healthy. In the story of interbeing, health health means wholeness, and that means a wholeness of relationships. So think of a dandelion in a field, virtually unkillable because it is in community. So the health that we are really seeking is to restore our lost connections to each other, to plants and animals and soil and all of the life around us, our social connections, our intimacy with our own bodies, anything that broadens our connectedness will make us healthier in the sense that I'm talking about.
Yeah, I love that as a call to action and to restore our lost connections to self and others. It's beautiful. Charles, this has been so delightful. Are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you, your work, your books?
Well, I'm on the internet, so you can find me there. My website is charleseisenstein.org, and I just launched a kind of an ongoing program called The Turning of the Age. And every month I come onto it and I give a More Beautiful World progress report, so people can look into that. And I write on Substack as well.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know, Instagram, YouTube, various places.
Amazing. So you're very findable. And what's your Substack newsletter name?
That's just Charles Eisenstein.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And we'll include all the links in the show notes for people to find it.
Yeah, thank you, Yasmin. That's very kind of you.
Of course, of course. Thank you so much for your time, Charles. This is so lovely. I could listen to you all day, and I'm just so grateful that you are here on Earth at this time.
Thanks. Yeah, likewise. Just really enjoyed this.
Aw. And for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about how to make the world more beautiful with Charles Eisenstein. And you can tune into Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, consciousness, and spirituality. Thanks again.